I'm going to say it. It's probably the most important invention of all time. But the printing press made a total mess of English. It spoilt our spelling and pillaged our pronunciation. Allow me to explain how in another Rob Words. Oh, and this one features an extra special bit with one of my favourite YouTubers. He's going to talk us through some of the many words and phrases in English that actually come from the world of printing. So, definitely don't leave before that bit. But first, let's go back in time. It's the middle of the 15th century, and you don't have any books. You don't have any books because they are ridiculously expensive. And they're ridiculously expensive because there are only a few thousand in the world. And there are only a few thousand in the world because each one of them has to be written out by hand. But luckily, a fella in Germany has just had one of the most significant brainwaves in human history. His name is Johannes Gutenberg, and he reckons he has a way of massively speeding up the process of making books, and therefore also making them cheaper. He's come up with a contraption that requires you to lay out all the letters, punctuation and spaces that make up a page only once, then reproduce that same page over and over and over again. Genius. Inspired by the machines used by winemakers to crush grapes and by oil makers to smush olives, little Johnny Gutenberg has invented the printing press. Now, this is not the first example of movable type. Gutenberg has probably heard tell of the machines the Chinese have been using for a few hundred years by this point. Indeed, the paper he needs to feed his printing press has been invented in China too. But from a European perspective, this is a massive moment. I'm on board with the idea that Gutenberg's press was perhaps the most significant invention of all time. Where a scribe could generally write 1 or 2 pages a day, Gutenberg's machine could pump out over 3,500 in the same amount of time. As a result, books became cheaper and much more widely available. It's estimated something like 50,000 books were produced in Europe during the entire millennium leading up to Gutenberg's brainwave. But in the 50 years that followed, that figure is in the millions. This enables the wider and faster spread of information and ideas. Without it, there's no scientific revolution, there's no Renaissance, there's no industrial revolution, there's no internet. The printing press democratizes knowledge, putting books in the hands of people who would never have otherwise been able to afford them. Pretty profound stuff. But it also does something else. It kind of breaks English. The first book ever printed in English is printed by this guy, William Caxton, an Englishman living in Bruges in modern-day Belgium. Most books are being printed in Latin at this point because Latin books can be sold in multiple countries. But Willie here reckons there's a market for books in English back home. So he sets about translating books that are in other languages into English. And he starts off with this. This is the first book ever printed in the English language. It is a collection of the tales of Troy, translated from French. Admittedly, it isn't translated particularly well. For example, William hasn't even bothered to translate one of the words in the title. This is the first recorded use of the word recueil in English. It's just the French word recueil, meaning collection. But nevertheless, this is a massive moment. A moment that Caxton follows up on by publishing a book about chess. It's translated from Latin and it's a metaphor for society or something. I don't know. But anyway, confident he was onto a good thing, Caxton decided to move back to merry old England and start printing his books there, setting up England's very first printing press in the process. A move that earned him a place in a BBC list of the top 100 Britons of all time back in 2002, ahead of Robbie Williams, but also behind David Beckham. 2002. But the establishment of the first press in England would begin a process that would change English, and not necessarily for the better. Early printers, like Caxton, whether they wanted it or not, suddenly had a huge amount of power, because decisions they made about how the English language would be committed to the page would be spread far and wide, and set a standard that lasted well beyond their lifetimes. Up until this point, English is being spoken in a variety of funky different ways around England and beyond. There was a rich array of dialects, even richer than there is today. So for his books, Caxton had to choose one of these dialects. And he went with one that he was well used to in Westminster, the London-based Chancery Standard, sometimes known as King's English, because it was the version of English used by the Chancery clerks preparing documents for the King. And we're all living with that decision by Caxton today, because as Caxton's books spread, this version of English spread with them and forms the basis for today's written form of English. So there you have it, one massive way in which the printing press alone alters English, bringing this one dialect to prominence and contributing to the dying off of countless other ones. But there are plenty of more ways, which I'll get onto in a second. But earlier, I basically claimed the invention of the printing press was more important than the advent of the internet. And I stand by that, because without the one, you don't get the other, but also because the internet has all kinds of drawbacks that the printing press does not. You can't catch malware from a pamphlet or have your data stolen by a book. But luckily, you can dodge the dangers of the internet too, with this video's sponsor, NordVPN. NordVPN has all the benefits of a regular VPN and so much more. Yes, it'll help you change your online location to protect your privacy and allow you to access streaming content from anywhere in the world, but its Threat Protection Pro feature keeps you, your data, and your money extra safe. It'll scan any files you download for malware, direct you away from websites known for scamming people, and block irritating, harmful pop-ups. What's more, its dark web monitor will regularly check the murkiest parts of the internet to see if anyone's trying to sell your data. I have NordVPN switched on all the time. I often research these videos in a cafe using an unsecured Wi-Fi network. So NordVPN keeps my connection safe. Plus, I can have it on up to 10 devices. So use my special link, nordvpn.com/robwordsvpn, to get an exclusive deal with 4 extra months for free on the 2-year plan. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so just give it a go. So I want to talk a bit more about how the decisions of early printers still haunt us today, like typographical ghosts. Actually, there's one right there. Did you know that Caxton and his pals are entirely responsible for the H in ghost? The word ghost goes way back to Old English and beyond. It manifests itself in various forms over the centuries, from gast to geist to goist, but at no point is it spelt with an H. That is until the printing press comes along. You see, Caxton needed experienced typesetters to work his presses, and all his best contacts were back in Bruges. So he hired people from continental Europe for the job. The problem is, they would sometimes be influenced by the spellings from their native languages. Caxton wasn't producing many spooky stories, but he was pumping out religious texts, and when it came to descriptions of the Lord Almighty, aka the Holy Ghost, his typesetters, inspired by the Flemish word geest, or geest, I don't know how they pronounced it, but they spelt it with an H. That spelling caught on, and it remains the standard. But thankfully, a load of similar changes did not. Otherwise, we'd be writing about girls, geese, goats, and guests. The invasive H wasn't entirely non-contagious, though. The word ghoul only got its H to make the ghoulies match up with the ghosties, and gherkin got one too, but no one really knows why. What a pickle. But these GH words do not represent the only confusing combination of letters brought about by the arrival of the presses. The early print works are also the where, the what, the when, and the who behind why we have so many WH words in English. You see, before Caxton and his crew, these weren't WH words. They were HW words. Indeed, there's a remnant of this in accents that pronounce the H in words like where. They put it before the W, not after. Where. See? But typesetters are believed to have thought that popping the H after the W was a better fit for a language rich with THs, CHs, and SHs. Huh? A positive side effect of this approach, however, is that the word whole, meaning complete, or before that healthy, inexplicably gained a W, helpfully enabling us to differentiate it from the sort of hole you might fall down. So you can see that printers loved consistency, and they sometimes let that get the better of them. Their obsession with making words match with one another has left us with a whole host of horrible silent letters in our language. For example, the words thumb, crumb, and limb only gained those B's at the end to make them match with comb, lamb, and womb, which already had them. And could only has that L so it doesn't clash with should and would, where should and would are past tense forms of verbs that actually had L's in them. Could was not, and still isn't. Coulda, woulda, shoulda, left well alone. We can actually glean from that that the L's in would and should were probably already silent by this point. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had the audacity to stick one in another word where it wouldn't be sounded out. And that's a symptom of something else that's happening as a result of the printing press and spread of literacy. Spelling and pronunciation are becoming disconnected. There are a couple of really big reasons for that. One, a specific dialect becoming the dominant written form meant people were saying words in their own dialect, but writing them based on someone else's. And two, the timing of the printing press's arrival could not have been worse. It meant that spellings were being fixed just at the time when English pronunciation was midway through a revolution known as the Great Vowel Shift. I made a whole video about this in which I explained how through a centuries-long process, long vowel sounds in English changed in a systematic way. So words that are pronounced with a start to be pronounced with a
E,
or words that were pronounced with a
O,
were then pronounced with a
U.
This meant that, for example, the word mate slowly changed to being pronounced meat, and the word bought gradually turned into boat. However, midway through this process, the printing press gets invented, meaning spellings are being fixed while pronunciations are still in flux. To this day, we're spelling words in a way that reflects how they were pronounced for only a brief period hundreds of years ago. Now, if the press had come along after the shift, everything would be great. Spellings and pronunciations would be much closer together. And if it had come along before the Great Vowel Shift, spellings and pronunciations wouldn't match, sure, but at least they'd be consistently wrong. But nope, Gutenberg's timing, so far as English is concerned, could barely have been worse. Alright, I've been a little bit down on little Johnny G's invention so far, but really, it's obviously been a major benefit to mankind, even if it hasn't done learners of English spelling any favours at all. And what's more, the industry that built up around the printing presses, that remains with us today, has enriched our language with all manner of typographical terms and common clichés. In fact, cliché is one of them. To help us get to know those a little bit better, let's hear from one of my absolute favourite YouTubers, Linus Boman, whose videos about design, fonts and other typographical themes have provided me with many a geeky thrill.
Linus, my favourite typography-based YouTuber. Great to have you.
Thank you very much. High praise, high praise.
So there are two things to tackle here. One, the terms we use when we're typing on our modern devices that originate in the physical process of printing, and two, the terms from printing that we use in completely different contexts, often unaware of their roots in the printworks. So let's get into both of those with Linus. But I just have a question that I need answering, because I think I might have been getting something wrong.
So Helvetica, Arial, Times New Roman, Comic Sans, dare we talk about it? Are they fonts or typefaces?
Those are typefaces.
I've been getting it wrong.
Historically speaking, Helvetica would be a typeface, whereas 10-point Helvetica Bold would be a font. So that would be a very specific size and style of that family. Well, font family is another way of saying typeface.
So that folder on your computer that says fonts, that should technically say typefaces. I doubt they'll change it now.
It goes back to a much earlier time in printing, which was where we started with Gutenberg, which was foundry type. And that was when we printed words on pages using tiny metal stamps, and there was a little piece of metal for each letter. and those were called sorts, and that's where we get the term out of sorts, which we can unpack.
We will.
In that era, a font would be an entire type case of sorts, and that would be all of the letters, numbers, symbols, and punctuation you would need to set a certain amount of text in your given language. So that was the other thing, is that to print a certain amount of German, you would need a different amount of different letters than a certain page of English text, for example, because the frequency at which you use different letters changes by language.
Oh, yeah. In French, they almost never use a W, right? So
Yes.
You don't need so many Ws.
You definitely need more SZ characters in your German font than in your English font, for example.
So when the printing press was just appearing, there were characters in English that no longer are in English. And part of the reason for that is the fact that the continental typesetters just didn't have them, right?
Like the thorn that you've made quite famous.
Bring back Thorn.
But of course, we're talking about a print technology that lasted for 4 centuries. So yeah, a lot of innovations happened over that 4 centuries, but quite small ones when we think of innovation these days.
But I love the way terms from this period are still lingering in our language today, like to be out of sorts, a phrase we use to describe when you're in some discomfort or feeling unwell, feeling not quite right. And it seems it comes from printing.
Sorts were the names for each of those little metal stamps that you got in your type case. Any character, so whether it's a question mark or an SZ or an E, those are all different sorts. And to be out of sorts is if you actually ran out of pieces because you didn't have enough to print another page, then that was not good luck.
But these little sorts are also responsible for another idiom, when we urge someone to mind their P's and Q's, a warning to be extra careful.
You reuse the same shapes for certain letters, but then it makes it so that if you are rotating something 180 degrees and it's upside down, your B may look very similar to your letter Q.
You would have to do it upside down, right, if you were setting up the printing, right?
Yes, the letters were mirrored when you would look on them because they were then printed to be the right way around. So P's and Q's are mirror images of each other. Very easy mistake to make.
I love this sort of thing. So we're talking about minding physical P's and Q's, and that's the thing with so many of these terms from printing. We're now using references to actual objects in a figurative way on our computers and tablets and phones. Take another example, upper and lower case.
If you want to get pedantic about language and terminology, yeah, upper and lower case only applies to type, not to handwriting. The terms come from typography and this era of foundry type, when you would have all of your metal pieces of type in a type case, and that was just a compartmentalized box. And at least for some period, it was common practice to have 2 type cases, an upper and a lower case. And the upper case is where you would keep the majuscules, which were, what we now call all caps or uppercase letters. And then the lower case was where the minuscules were kept. So that was also really dependent on what kind of printer you were and what country it was and what time.
So they're physical cases. Wild. Actually, wild has become a bit of a modern cliché, hasn't it? And as I mentioned, the word cliché, but also the word stereotype, both came from the presses.
These were essentially time-saving measures, weren't they?
Broadly speaking, they were ways of taking an impression of something that was manually typeset so that it didn't have to be tying up resources. So if you, for example, had only, 2 fonts worth of Times New Roman 10 point, that meant you could only make certain number of pages of text with the type that you had. But you could then take an impression of it in a paper mache type substance that would then dry, and you could then cast another plate, printing plate from that impression. And that was the stereotype. And cliché was a similar kind of process for taking an impression of something that was manually typeset and then being able to kind of keep it in archive. So I think something that was quite common is if a book was pressed and maybe you've taken apart all of those page layouts into its constituent parts now, and it's going to be a lot of work to reset that entire book, but it's selling extremely well. It's very helpful if you've already made stereotypes of all of those pages, and you can just go and pour some molten lead into those and print them up again, rather than have to do all of that manual labor again.
And the word cliché itself is actually imitative of one of the squelching sounds made during the casting process. I love that. So clichés and stereotypes were actually pretty useful. The word typecast also comes from a letter moulding process, as does the word logo. The original word was logogram or logotype, and it described when you would cast an entire word all at once instead of letter by letter. Ideal for when you want to consistently print a certain word a certain way, like, say, if it was the signature symbol of a publication or brand.
Rather than having to manually put the G and then the O and then the O and the G and the L for the Google logo, if we're imagining a anachronistic example, then if you were, Google in the 1800s, you might have one cast piece of metal with your company name in a single unit that could be reused on, stationery and reports and everything without having to manually do that each time.
The logo bit of logotype comes from the Greek logos, meaning word. So etymologically speaking, this is a logo, but this is not, because it's not a word. But as regular viewers to this channel already know, meanings can change.
Linus,
Thank you so much to Linus for talking us through all of that. We discussed loads more, actually. So I'm going to put a longer version of our chat up on my Patreon at some point where you can watch it. And for goodness sake, subscribe to Linus's channel. If you haven't watched his videos already, I'm jealous that you have that ahead of you. But don't go anywhere now, because I want to show you something. This is a book of Victorian-era printing terms. It's Jacobi's Printer's Vocabulary, a collection of some 2,500 technical terms, phrases, abbreviations, and other expressions, many of which have been in use since the time of Caxton. And we can be thankful that not every piece of printing parlance has made it into wider English usage. Phrases like to sop one's balls. It means to oversaturate the balls you use to ink the lettering with. But it sounds way worse. From that book, I've learned it's possible to squabble a scabby shammock in a cock robin shop, or fly a frisket from a donkey engine into a hell box. It is a colourful world, the world of printing, and one that has made the English language all the more colourful itself, for better and for worse. Thanks for watching this video. If you've liked it, you should watch my one about the great vowel shift next, or if you've already seen it, I recommend this one. And if you fancy something for free, sign up to my newsletter where I send out a weekly dose of word facts and language fun. I'll catch you in whatever you choose to watch next. Take care.